Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'm going to take another look at Labour's position on Brexit. After all, there's no PMQs today, so we may as well discuss this one. And these crop up from time to time. The last did one a few weeks ago, and it's because whatever your views on Brexit, it does matter what an alternative government aims to do about it. In this case, I want to look at why Labour really hate talking about Brexit. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, when Keir Starmer first became Labour leader, he said he didn't want the next election to be about Brexit. And I and others said, tough. There's no getting away from the fact that Brexit will be writ large upon the national debate come the next election. And there are two main reasons for this. The first is that it will be completely changing our lives. Actually, both Leavers and Remainers agreed that Brexit would completely change our lives from the start. But the difference was that the first group said it would change it positively and the latter negatively. Well, with a huge increase in the cost of living, stifled trade with the county of Kent being a place where you're more likely to step in human poo than dog poo, I'm going to suggest that Remainers got it right. But either way, come the next election, people are bound to want to review Brexit. Given that the previous two general elections were both fought mostly on Brexit, it's natural that voters, many of whom may not be considering Brexit too much in the interim, will think, well, let's have a little review, shall we? And the second reason it will feature is that the Conservatives want it to. In order to avoid difficult questions about why, after all the promises of shiny things that the Conservatives continually make, the shiny things are still not here after over a decade of Tory rule. So they need to blame someone else. They need a culture war to divide and rule the population. And it's this second one that is most dangerous and that the Labour leadership are most conscious of. Starmer needs the next election to be as little about Brexit as possible because of the following situation. So let's face facts, of the many people who see Brexit for the deeply damaging policy that it is, they are not likely to vote Conservative. Like, some may be Conservatives. There are plenty of Conservatives who are against Brexit and are still against Brexit. And they would prefer to vote for a more traditional Tory government. But that is not on offer. Boris Johnson represents a real threat to the very fabric of our society. UK democracy, the UK itself, may be no more in the next decade or two if we continue on our current path. And those who will listen to experts rather than con merchants in politics will be fully seized of the danger. They want it stopped, they want it reversed. And whether we are on the left or the right of politics, those with our eyes open can see that there is an urgent need to reverse the rot. So of course what we would want is politics to urgently address it. We would like the only viable alternative government, which can only be led by Labour, to be the standard bearers for this reversal. So why don't they? Well, Labour have a couple of problems in doing this. The first is that even though there are more people who wished Brexit never happened than are glad, and that proportion goes up way more when you consider those who might vote Labour. But it's not the automatic vote winner that people think. Now, I have shown this through various public polls in the past and pointed out that we do not have specific polling data ourselves that Labour do. We don't have access to the very specific polling data on the key voters for the next election that Labour do. But I'm not going to go over all that again. I did do a video just a few weeks ago on it. I'll link it in the description below if people are interested, because it does add further context to what I'm talking about here. But the second problem is that Labour can't promise more than they already have. They've promised to work with the EU for closer alignment. That would ease the trade problems that we're having and that are currently set to get worse. It would particularly help with standards checks. So it would ease the standards checks taking place on British goods passing into the EU. So that would ease trade barriers. We haven't even tackled standards checks coming into the country. When that happens, all hell's going to break loose. But it would also mitigate that. It's not, however, a reversal of Brexit. It's making it better. In addition, they're refusing to even entertain the notion of going further in alignment. You know, even someone like me might say, well, yeah, I get that, you know, alignment has to be the first step anyway. Fine, promise that. Do you have to keep ruling out going any further? You know, this has understandably frustrated some people. But Labour, in reality, can't offer any more. In order to negotiate another formal treaty, doesn't matter what it is, customs union, certainly re-entry into the single market, full membership, my goodness, there would need to be cross-party support. Who happens to hold the balance of power after the next election doesn't matter. The negotiations would take time, and shortly after completion, the Conservatives could come straight back into power and wreck it all again. The EU are not interested in diverting significant resources to support significant reintegration until there is widespread popular support for it in the UK. In fact, Max Robespierre put up a video recently, which I'll also link below, where he interviewed the Fine Gael's European spokesperson, Neil Richmond. Everything he said in that interview is in complete agreement with what I've been hearing from other EU sources for the past few years. The UK can do nothing to substantially reverse Brexit until the issue is politically settled in the UK. Like a 52% referendum was enough to have us leave the EU because that had nothing to do with the rest of the EU. They had no say in the matter. But they do get a say in whether we rejoin, even bits of it, even if rejoin the single market. They will not restart readmission on a mere 52% win referendum where the party that is mostly in power, the Conservative Party are mostly in power in this country, are dead against it. Doesn't matter who's in power for that little snapshot. This is the uncomfortable truth and the reason why Labour hate talking about Brexit. It's not because they're soft on the issue. It's certainly not because the leaders are anti-EU. That notion, I mean, people can agree and disagree about various Labour strategies. The notion that the current Labour leadership are anti-EU is ridiculous. Like anyone who ever heard the likes of Starmer or Lammy or Reeves or Cooper, several other members of the senior leadership team talk about Brexit before we left, can be in no doubt that they are pro-European. And more than that, that they understand that it is best for the UK that would be in the EU. You know, they were MPs at the time in a Labour Party where the Lexiteer voices were amplified. They weren't in the majority, but they were amplified. And those people were still crystal clear about the damage that would be done. But it is a problem because on the one hand, they can't promise a great Brexit reversal because they can't deliver. It doesn't matter how much political will they have. It doesn't matter how many MPs they have. They can't promise it because the EU will just say, nah. And, you know, it's not because they're not taking this stance because they're trying to win over Brexit supporters in the north of England. That's what people assume. Well, they must be trying to win over the Brexit voters in the north of England. The vast majority of pro-Brexit voters not going to vote Labour. Those votes are not up for grabs. Brexit light isn't a policy that wins people over. I tried to say this at the last election. You cannot, if you're going to try and attract the votes of Brexit voters, you're not going to do it with a weaker version of Brexit. You're not going to be able to stand in the shadow of the Brexit Party, which was the Conservative Party, not the actual Brexit Party, and win their votes on Brexit light. The vast majority of people who would even consider voting Labour are not pro-Brexit. We still see that consistently from polls. We saw it consistently in the polls before we left the EU. However, Labour have no power to promise that great Brexit reversal. So what would happen if they did? Let us say they did anyway. First, they would lose some votes because there are some people who are not against Brexit, might even be in favour of it, who will consider Labour. It's like there's not a huge minority, but there is maybe a significant core. Remember, the Conservatives won the general election not by a huge number of votes in the country, but by winning about 100 seats by a small margin of a few thousand votes. That was it. You know, so you can't afford to lose votes unnecessarily unless there's a payoff. So they would lose some votes, and a greater proportion of those lost votes would be in key target seats. Now that would be foolish unless there's a payoff. If there's a payoff, you can say, okay, all balances out. So let's say adopting that position allows them to attract more votes to compensate for those lost ones and propels them to power. Let us just say, what then? When all they can do, so they go through the next parliament, they go into the next election, all they've been able to achieve is closer alignment, which is what they're promising now anyway. And nothing else, because anything else requires sitting down with the EU for several years to negotiate something. And they will not hold those talks while the Conservatives are waiting in the wings and still intent on a hard Brexit. So they'll fail. They'll fail to achieve anything more. So the people who voted for the Brexit reversal then become disillusioned because, hang on, where's this Brexit reversal we were promised? And then they go on splitting their votes amongst other parties again in the following election. The Tories come back in and the nightmare starts all over again. However, that being said, every time Labour say that they will not or cannot rejoin the EU, or that there will be no freedom of movement or anything like that, any of the... I'm still not convinced that they had to even talk about that, no freedom of movement, by the way. But any of these make Brexit work type statements is like a red rag to a bull. It's voter repellent to some people as well. And people will say, well, if Labour won't change their policy on this, I'm not going to vote for them, I'll vote for someone else. Even though this means basically supporting a continuation of the Conservative hard Brexit government and our slide into fascism. So it's a no-win situation for Labour. I often think it's a bizarre situation that we found ourselves in. And I confess, I didn't see this coming before Brexit. Before we left the EU, you thought, how can the Conservatives survive the realities of Brexit? Especially their hard Brexit. Like a single market Brexit, they could have gotten away with that. It would still have been worse than membership because we'd lose our say in the rules we have to follow. But it would be harder to point it out because it wouldn't actually have crippled our trade. Now, the Conservatives couldn't survive the Brexit world they created. No wonder Boris Johnson, we left the EU, Boris Johnson forbade civil servants even using the word Brexit after we left. This was before the pandemic, only just. And he said, at the time they thought, they knew what was coming when we left the single market and the customs union. They knew what was coming and they didn't want people linking it to Brexit. They wanted it to be something else. But now look, I don't know how much the pandemic did help them. I know it must have done to a certain extent. But here we are with the Conservatives now loving to talk about Brexit. They want to talk... February 2020, Boris Johnson said to civil servants, don't use the word Brexit. He dissolved his Brexit department. There was no Brexit minister anymore. He wanted to make out Brexit had been completely done. So any damage that'll happen in 11 months' time when we happen to leave the single market is nothing to do with Brexit, it's something else. Now he's appointed a new Brexit minister to go and shoot his mouth off. You know, loves talking about Brexit. It's Labour who can do no right whenever they open their mouths about it. So they choose not to whenever possible. This is the madness of Brexit. But those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.